Greetings, Benjamin J. from BENZTRAINZ with another in the series. I'll follow up on that 999 that arrived, what was it, last Friday, Thursday, I don't know. Had the spoked wheels. I bought it for the wheels, and of course I got it running. Anyway, this is the contactor that was on it. And as you see, it is worn completely through on one end and almost completely through on the other end. But the spring was missing. And I couldn't figure out what the problem was. And the thing was really wobbly on the wheels, and it didn't have any traction, which meant there was too much pressure on this contactor actually lifting the locomotive off the rail. So I started looking at it, and I discovered that the plate, the contactor plate, was actually warped. It was curled up at both ends and pushing this contactor up way too high. So I didn't want to tear this motor apart to replace that entire contactor and plate. So a good expedient is you can replace it with a Lionel contactor, as you see. And you just judiciously grind the sides down till it fits in between the side plates. And then the pressure from that screw in the bottom of the brush plate actually locks it in position. I haven't cut the notch yet, but I'll put a little notch right there. Anyway, just got this installed, ran a new wire to it. This is really crude, but it worked. So getting ready for its first run around the rail, I just ran it on the bench. So the Marx 999 with the new Lionel contactor. As you see, 1000% better, and it has some real traction now. It was having trouble pulling a fairly good size consist. So anyway, I've got a Lionel consist on the rail. So I figured I would put this on here and shoot a video of the first trip around the rail, pulling a consist with that new contactor. So we've gone from the Marx contactor that is completely worn through, as you see. And rather than gutting that entire motor to replace that plate and contactor, I just put that Lionel contactor in there. So let's see, as you see, it's up and running. Has good pulling power. It's getting good traction now, no problem. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Lionel cars. I could probably put 10 or 12 on here. Add a traction tire, it'll pull 15 or 16. Anyway, it's running absolutely perfectly. So it's a great expedient. Saves you a lot of work of having to replace that contactor and plate. Now you can snap those contactor plates in there if you do it carefully without pulling the side rods or pulling the side plate off or loosening it. But since I had that Lionel contactor over in the junk box, I figured I'd just modify it, and it's just a friction fit and then held in by the bottom screw on the brush plate. So as you see, an instant repair. This actually works quite well. It only takes a minute to do this. So saved me a lot of work. I already had the Lionel contactor. It actually only took a minute to put it in there. So I figured I'd just go ahead and replace it. And the motor's in good enough shape. Eventually I'll go ahead and put a new contactor in it. But this way it got it up and running, and I didn't have to do anything as far as pulling wheels or loosening the side plates or fighting around with installing that new contactor plate and then contactor and spring. That Lionel contactor is one complete unit. Just drop it in, like I said, grind it till it's a good friction fit, drop it into position, solder the wire onto it, and that bottom screw on the brush plate holds it really securely. As you can see, this is up and running just absolutely perfectly now. No muss, no fuss. That contactor is no longer lifting it off the rail. Because I couldn't figure out why that contactor was so worn if the spring was gone. And this thing had really, really terrible traction. So in any case, as you see, that Lionel contactor just literally drops in there. And it's an expedient, but I already had the contactor. And the Lionel contactor is one integral unit. It's got a built-in spring for both contacts rather than having one with a spring in the center and a separate spring at that. Anyway, judiciously grind it down so it's a good friction fit. And like I said, that bottom screw in the brush plate comes through the side plate and then really locks this thing into position. Now you don't need to do this. You can epoxy it there. no big deal. But this way, I just loosen this screw, I can lift the whole thing right back out. And that way, if I want to, I can go ahead and put a new Marx contactor on it. But as an expedient, this worked. It only took a minute. And of course, you can repair these. When you find these contactors that are worn this badly, what you can do is just clamp them in the vise and then just fill this in with solder and make it flat again. It gets rid of the groove. And it'll last for years. It won't last forever, but it would last the rest of my life, no doubt. And it's a great expedient, like I said, when you come across a bad contactor. And the problem was the contactor plate itself was bent up on both ends. No idea how or why. The contactor plate is actually a piece of fiberboard. And it could have gotten damp, could have gotten oil on it. No idea, but it was bent up at both ends. And that's why there was no spring in this. It didn't need the spring anymore, but it was putting an inordinate amount of pressure on this contactor, as you see, and that's why it's worn on both ends. It's completely worn through on this side and almost worn through on that side, as you see. So I just pulled it out. The plate was warped really badly. So I just snapped the plate out of it and then modified this Lionel contactor to fit between the two side plates, a good tight friction fit, and then tightened that bottom screw, and you can see it's impinging on that side plate, so it's really putting some pressure on that. And this will last until I get around to repairing it. It'll actually last forever. It's never going to wear out. It works, it's simple. It only took a minute, and it didn't require any disassembly. Just modified that Lionel contactor. And the result is you have a motor that's up and running. Good traction on the locomotive itself. No problem pulling this consist at all. And that contactor will last virtually forever. Like I said, you can repair these with solder if you want to. And it's always a good idea to have a spare contactor just in case. So I may do a video of actually repairing this one. But in the meantime, I want to do a video on installing that Lionel contactor on this Marx motor. It works. It's really, really simple. It only takes a few minutes to do it. A lot faster than replacing the Marx contactor. It's actually a better contactor. It has a lot less surface area touching the track, so it doesn't make nearly as much friction. And yet it delivers full power from the rail to the motor with no problem at all. So this will run virtually forever now. So I may just leave it this way. And this was an old beater I bought just to get those wheels off of it. And I touched up the paint and got it running, but I haven't done anything else to it. As you can see, it's still really, really dirty. But overall condition, this is that one I touched up the paint with the ink marker. And this thing was a wreck. If you look back at the video when I unboxed this was junk. This was absolute junk. Anyway, it's up and running. It looks more than acceptable. That contactor made a tremendous difference in how this thing works, because that contactor was shot. I mean, it was shot. And all because that contactor plate was warped on both ends. So I don't know whether it was moisture or whether it was oil. I'm not really sure. I've never seen that before. But it made a tremendous difference when I pulled that contactor off and replaced it. And I didn't have to disassemble the motor. So just modified that Lionel contactor, dropped it in there. It's up and running really, really well, as you can see. So a great expedient. So if you come across Lionel contactors, don't toss them. Keep them, and you can use them on lots and lots of Marx motors. It's a great expedient for a defective or missing contactor on a Marx motor. So just a quick video. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email, BENZTRAINZ@gmail.com. And as always, thank you for watching.